Hello, and welcome to the Hello You Show, where we talk about big dreams and taking real action. Through transformative stories, a bit of neuroscience, and real conversations, this show is here to help you explore creating your next level life with authenticity and passion. I'm Jessica Rice, a design techie and former engineering leader turned vision evolution coach on a mission to help other women rise up and lead a life of purpose. So get cozy and say hello again to the real you. For those of you who aren't familiar with who I am, what I do, my name is Jessica Rice. I am a vision evolution coach. I'm the founder of Jessica Rice Coaching and the host of the Hello You Show podcast. And I work with leaders who are really ready to just kind of rise up in their thought leadership. And to do so, it takes personal resilience, it takes grit, it takes motivation. And there are so many things and facets that we have to consider in not only our leadership and how we rise into being amazing leaders, but also how we then show up for ourselves on the days when it doesn't feel like we want to, or maybe it's just feeling a little bit too hard, or we're not really even sure what it is that we're even trying to do in the first place. And so sometimes our emotions can really take hold of us and our ability to show up and to do things. And this is true for life, right? This is true for everything that we experience within our lives, right? Whether it is going to that one dinner this evening or that networking event that we didn't want to attend, or any of the other numerous events within our lives that sometimes, given the choice, we wouldn't do. But as we know, success, it requires effort. And how much input goes into our efforts determines the output that we receive. It determines the reward, so to speak. I was talking to my son this morning about really the importance of doing good work as opposed to just doing the work, right? And there's a difference, right? When we are just doing the work, sure, it might be getting done more or less. It might be checking off some boxes. But is there really good work? Is it something we feel passionate about? Is it something we feel proud of? Are we learning the things that we're supposed to be learning in that process? And I think it's so important that we consider about, as we're putting ourselves out there, we're thinking about how do we continue to rise as leaders? And we're formulating different opinions and ideas about what our leadership looks like, that we consider, what are we learning even in this process? What are we learning about ourselves? What are we learning about how we maneuver within our leadership and how we show up within our present roles, which then will determine and dictate how we show up in future states, in future roles? What is the intrinsic value that we have for doing this work? What is it that we're hoping to achieve? What is the ultimate reward? And I talk about intrinsic motivation quite often. And I think that this is incredibly true, for this specific topic and having grit, right? Because in our leadership, we are facing things that sometimes we don't want to face. They're difficult decisions that we're having to make, difficult conversations that we're having to have. We're having to manage up, strategize across, manage down, motivate our teams. There's numerous things that we are having to take part of on a daily basis and be responsible for. And so there's plenty of times where adding one more thing onto our plate just doesn't feel like something that we have time to do, that we want to do, should we do. And I think it's important to really center back into, what are we hoping to achieve? What's the outcome of our career? What is that longevity that we're looking to create that can bring us back to tying into, why I show up every day, why I'm doing personal development work, why I'm continuing to hone these skills, because it is challenging. No, make no mistake, it is challenging. But there are certain key components that I think are important to consider. And I know on Monday's live, I talked a bit about Angela Duckworth and her work with Character Lab and developing grit within children. And I think it's especially important for us too, right? As leaders, we are continually learning and evolving and honing our skills and growing as people. It never ends, it never stops. And so adopting that growth mindset is imperative because that's what determines whether we stop or whether we succeed. So how do we develop grit? And I like to think of it as, we have intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. And what does that mean to us? And so I would liken it to, we have intrinsic grit and we have extrinsic grit. So we show up for our job every single day, right? We do it because we don't want to lose our job. That would be extrinsic grit, right? Those days where in the morning you just want to sleep a little bit longer, you don't want to show up, you don't want to have that one conversation with that one person that you know is going to feel painful, right? There's lots of things that come up. And given the choice, you may not volunteer to show up and do some of the work, but we do it anyways. We do it because we don't want to lose our jobs. We don't want to know what our livelihood would look like should we not be employed. And so we go anyways, right? And we have this extrinsic grit. The motivation is there based out of fear. And it's there because we know that the consequence would be greater than, the not doing of the thing. And so we show up. And then even while we're in our roles, right, we take pride within our work sometimes, right? There's certain things that light us on fire, we're excited about, we enjoy. And we want to prove to others and we want to prove ourselves that we are, made for this role. We're the right fit. We're the right person. We have the right expertise. And so we take pride in what it is that we do and we stop, we start obsessively maybe even thinking about how we show up in our roles and all of the little facets and pieces of there and how we can perform better and operate better and create processes and strategies that are more efficient and refined. That's intrinsic motivation, right? Because it's showing like ourselves, this is what we want to do. And the reward is greater. It's not so much about losing the job, but it is for finding that pride within ourselves. And there might be a bit of extrinsic motivation as well, because there is risk attached, right? We want others to think well of us. So it's a mix. It's a bit of both. But if we're given the opportunity, sometimes we lean heavily on extrinsic motivation to keep us pushing forward, to keep us moving forward, to show up and do the hard work. And when you decide that you want to become a thought leader and you want to rise up and you want to excel within your career to a greater level, maybe it's to the next level in your company, maybe it's another role within your industry, maybe you want to found or co-found a company, maybe you want to sit on a board, whatever that looks like for you, it requires an additional degree of effort. And now it's not based out of fear. And it has to be based out of motivation. It has to be based out of intrinsic motivation for your life and what it brings in terms of satisfaction, fulfillment, meaning, purpose, all of these things. And this is a really interesting piece because we don't know sometimes how to show up for ourselves when it isn't fear-based, when it isn't extrinsic, when it isn't just the dangling carrot of a greater salary. And so therefore we are, by our own volition, are showing up and stating that this is what we want for our lives. And we're not very familiar with that. And so it becomes a lot easier for us to give up or to stop or to set back. When we're honing our leadership skills, and we're defining what it is that we stand for, and we're defining what our thought leadership message is, and we're putting ourselves out there on our own accord, it takes grit, it takes determination, it takes discipline, because no one is making you do it. No one is putting themselves, on the line for you. You are putting yourself on the line for your own future success. And it becomes muddier in there. And so it becomes easier for us to just give up because our mind is telling us this is the opposite of what we should be doing. It's risky. We're going to fall on our face. We're going to make a mistake. People are going to laugh at us. They're going to reject us. There's all these thoughts that start to happen. So why would we show up for ourselves in that way every single day? Why would we put ourselves out there every single day? And so we really have to think about what is it that we want to create? What is the why behind that? What's the purpose behind what it is that we're wanting to do? Because we need to tie back our motivation to a higher meaning, to something that is greater than ourselves, so that we can develop that intrinsic motivation that gets us up every morning, that excites us, that fuels that fire, so that even when things do happen, and they do in our jobs every day too, right? That we still go forward and do the things, take the steps, take the leap. We have to be willing to put ourselves out there and muster that courage every single day, even when we don't feel like it. That's what separates us and not following through, right? There's a lot of examples of people who have great dreams and they have great visions. They don't take action on it. And you have to take action to see something, see a result, right? We have to take action. And in truth, that's how we move through fear. When we're in fear, we are paralyzed, we're stuck. So the only way to face our fears is to take action. That's how our minds are enabling us to have a new perspective, to teach ourselves, to learn, to demonstrate that what we're doing is worth it and worthwhile and works. So a few things to consider, when you're developing or cultivating a greater sense of resilience is really creating goals. And I don't care if they are small goals or big goals or life goals or personal goals. Just start creating goals for yourself and break them down and create things around meaning so that you have something that you are aiming for all the time, consistently pushing yourself out there. And then stick to them. Stick to your goals. If it's too big, break it down. Make it manageable for yourself. If you want to use SMART goals for yourself, fine. But if you want to make it like a task list where you're just like, hey, this week I'm going to do this, and this, fine. Make something that you can start to work on and improving that grit for yourself so that you're demonstrating that you do have what it takes to show up as a thought leader every single day. And then create mental space. You have to have the mental space and capacity to actually follow through. If you are not at your best, it's going to be a lot harder for you to muster up the energy and the mental faculties to be able to do this work. Sometimes we can say that we don't have enough time or that we're so busy, and it's true. We are dealing with more work and more stress than ever before. But how are you being deliberate? Be deliberate. Be deliberate with how you use your time, how you show up, what energy you pour yourself into. We are facing burnout on a greater level than I think historically we've seen. And that can lead to us wanting to zone out at the end of the day, just watch Netflix, whatever that looks like. But if you can think about, your day as collectively, you're adding into your cup or you're taking away. How are you deliberately spending your time, your energy, your focus? Because all of it adds up. And there's techniques that, I can talk about more, maybe another live around, how do we create greater time, greater space for ourselves? But thinking deliberately about how you spend your time and what you focus on is 90% of you sticking to your goals and creating blocks of time for personal growth, for deep work, deep thinking, mental clarity. And whether that's through meditation or other means, I know I coach around heart math and heart focused breathing, but whatever that looks like for you, find some space that you can allow for yourself to create that mental capacity to do the things that are needed to be done so that you are setting yourself up for success, so that you're playing the long game. And celebrate. Celebrate each victory, no matter how small it may seem. Again, small goals have small victories, but they are all worth celebrating. And demonstrate to your mind that what you set out to achieve is in fact happening. Our mind is a predictor of the future, so you have to continually challenge the assumptions that you are making. So if you are assuming that you're going to fail and then you still show up and you do the thing and you succeed, you have to celebrate that and you have to tell yourself, like, see, look, it worked. You are training your mind just as much as you are learning. And then create things, create systems, create tools, create ways that you can track your progress. Create that for yourself. All these things that we do within our jobs and our roles and we do for other people, we don't do for ourselves sometimes. Do it for you. Not only is this data that you are gathering on yourself and you are informing yourself of how you work best, you have now a record of your wins that you can continually look back on as motivation to keep going. You know, having that motivation, that's the reward center of your mind. And it's going to make a key difference in how you show up. It will always trump fear. Fear-based motivation is definitely not as strong as intrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation will always win if you give it the right environment, the right tools, the right ways that the dopamine can be released, and then you can see the results of your work and your efforts. When we're trying to overcome challenges and setbacks, remember that it's always going to be easier to second guess ourselves, to have doubts, to think that it's not worth it. Who am I? Imposter syndrome, self-doubt, self-deprecation. We're going to have days that are going to be challenging. So if you can create that space and have those techniques in place for yourself, you're just setting yourself up to make it easier to follow a plan and follow a system so that you're not having to do so much mental energy and effort. You're creating habits for yourself where it just starts to feel automatic. And this is just something that you do now. Just like when you wake up and you go and you get ready for work and then you go to work, this is a part of what you do, whether it's personal development or how you're wanting to show up in your own thought leadership and develop that for yourself. Anytime someone criticizes you, this is what you're going to need to see it through, to have the personal resilience to not be bothered, or at least be less bothered by what they say. Because again, it's your life. It's what it is that you want to create and cultivate for yourself. This is you rising up. And as leaders, we don't have the same paths, right? When we're starting out in our roles, more or less, there's a defined path for ourselves in terms of climbing, whatever said corporate ladder that most likely doesn't exist at this point. But in any case, you are now defining your future and what that looks like for you. And it takes deliberate planning and strategy and effort. And remind yourself of your why. Remind yourself of what motivates you and what this reward is for you, so that you can turn those negative emotions that you feel into powerful motivators for your future, for the legacy that you're creating for yourself and building yourself up reminding yourself, what is this larger gain and reward that you are receiving through rising above adversity? Every single day, if you can find ways to give yourself affirmations, tell yourself one good thing every day. We don't do that enough. We're really good at self-loathing, but tell yourself something good. You can even go a step further. You can do mirror work like Louise Hay talks about and stare at yourself and tell yourself that you love yourself. But do the affirmations and do the work because we need to hear it, and we need to hear it sometimes from ourselves. And breathe. Oh my goodness, we forget to breathe. Breathe into yourself. Breathe into your heart space. Breathe into yourself grace and compassion and peace and love. Breathe into every single day as a reminder of why you're here, what you're living for, what it is that you're doing. What's important for you to show up in your role every single day as it is important for you to continue in your success. And know your limits. There are going to be days that just flat out suck. They just don't go well. And know that that will happen. Know in advance that there will be days like that. So what are you going to do? And give yourself some space. Sometimes we do need to take a step back. Not forever, but for a day or an hour. Give yourself some space. Honor and accept the emotions and the feelings that you have. Put some reframe around the experience that you might be experiencing. And then walk forward fresh. Do what you need to do. Do the work, the personal development work, so that you are not putting yourself into a state of burnout, because burnout is not a recipe for success when it comes to personal resilience. If you can try to do these things, then you are setting yourself up, even minimally, right? These are minimal things that you can do to grow as a leader, to be a better leader, to show up for your team, to show up for your organization, and most importantly, to show up for yourself. It seems odd to show up for ourselves. We show up for so many other people, but it's really hard for us to show up for all of these other people if we can't show up for ourselves. It's we have to remember this is our life too. And we have a choice. We have a choice in how we show up. We have a choice in how we interact and respond and communicate and grow. These are all choices that we're making. But if we're not doing some of this work, it just makes it more challenging to be our best at anything it is what we're trying to do. We all know when we're tired and we're drained of energy, that's when we're a little bit sharper, a little bit more quick-tongued, a little less patient, a little less forgiving, a little less compassionate, a little more tired, a little less willing to do anything extra. Any effort seems harder. And if you're telling yourself, like, I don't have time for this, think about ways that you can create time. What can you carve out? What can you do instead? What can you block off on your calendar? What can you deliberately do that helps you? Sometimes we are mindlessly going through and just following whatever comes, and I think it gets harder when we're tired. So every little, notification on our phone, every little thing in Facebook or social media or whatever, it gets easier to do that because then we just get lost scrolling or whatever. We lose track of time. So be deliberate with your time. Create some boundaries for yourself so that you can be successful. And if you're having a hard time doing this for yourself, showing up for yourself, I will say it's incredible to have accountability with another individual. It's incredible to be able to share this experience with someone else. Of course, you can do it on your own. Of course, you have the answers. Of course you do. But sometimes we don't share with others in our families or our friends or with our colleagues our aspirations. We don't share what we're trying to create or our vision or our goals because we don't want to share something that we potentially could fail in. When I was working with one of my clients, it was really interesting because here was this brilliant data scientist. And not only was she brilliant, she was beautiful. She is beautiful. And she had become accustomed to this idea that that people would think that you can't have beauty and brains. And so she had spent a good portion of her life, even though that she is incredibly accomplished, PhDs, written several papers, just incredibly accomplished, that she was just going to be a chameleon about it and let people make the assumptions that they wanted to make. And she felt like this was protecting herself, protecting her ego to a certain extent, and allowing herself to do the work that she enjoyed to do without having to put herself out there in any kind of way or, receive negative attention. However, she was also really good at communication. She was good at negotiation and strategy and politics, policy, delivering speeches, all of these different things. And so her career started to move in this direction, not by her own fruition, but just because she was good at it. And she would be a chameleon and she would take on any role that they gave her, in addition to her role as a data scientist. At this point is when she started to recognize that she really didn't enjoy this part of her role, the public speaking and going out and doing all of the policy. That's not what she signed up to do. That's not what lit her up inside. That's not where she was passionate. And so as we started to work together, it became clear, like, she was capable of so much more, but she really wanted to define where she wanted to invest her time and her energy and her thought leadership in ways that mattered to her, in ways that would move the needle forward in the industry that she cared about, and in the ways that meant something. And so we started to strategize. What were her goals? What was the roadmap? What were the things that she wanted to consider? What were the types of companies or roles that she would be happy working with that would be in alignment with her core values, so that she could start to think about what was her own thought leadership? And then we would challenge the assumption along the lines of being a chameleon, and how was being a chameleon serving her? Because as she started to describe that several people in her company had taken on this idea that they could take credit for her work. And she would write papers and she would write presentations and she would put everything together. And then someone else would take it and they would go present it and they wouldn't give the credit back, even minimally. And she kind of convinced herself that it didn't really matter as long as the work was going out there. It didn't really matter if her name was first on the paper or last on the paper, even though she wrote it. It didn't really matter that even though she put the whole presentation together, that they presented it and they never once gave credit for key ideas and key things that had come through. And as we started to look and examine that, we started to recognize, like, this really wasn't serving her, because this was her playing small. This was her playing safe. And it wasn't really her rising up into the brilliant individual that she was and is. And so she stopped and she started to push back and she started to speak out and she started to reach out to other colleagues, within her industry that she could rely on and work with and create other papers with, that would bring greater meaning and value and purpose back into the work that she was doing, so that she didn't feel stuck within her role and not knowing not only what she was doing, with the trajectory that they were trying to move her down, but also even within the company that she was in. Sometimes we get really stuck within the constructs and the confines of the environment that we are in, that we don't recognize that, number one, that we can change the environment, and number two, we can change our approach to the environment that we are in. We can make things that maybe were acceptable to us not acceptable to us any longer. And we can stand up for ourselves. We can rise up in a variety of ways simply by changing the way that we're thinking about how we show up, who we are, what our message is, what our core values are, and really doing some of that deep work that oftentimes we don't really see the correlation. Like, how is this furthering my leadership? But it is, because you're getting to know what matters to you so that you can present that out into the world in a greater way. I hope this is helpful to think through. If you have other thoughts or questions, I would love to know, where do you seem to fall, or where do you feel like you land when it comes to having that intrinsic grit, that personal resilience that's required of you as a leader? And how do you see that translating into how you rise up as a thought leader in your industry? I'd love to know. Thank you for tuning into the Hello You Show. It's been a pleasure to have you with us on this journey today. If you found value in our conversation and want to support the show, please take a moment to like, follow, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'd also deeply appreciate it if you could leave us a review. Your feedback not only helps us grow, but also enables others seeking inspiration and authenticity to discover our community. Until next time, keep embracing your story with purpose.